And for the meeting today. Welcome you to the meeting itself. We're planning on having a real successful day. At least we're not going to guarantee it, but we're going to make a goal of it. So, and take care of it. So, with that, I would turn over to the chair of the host committee, Representative Nimitz.
Thank you very much, Senator Kirshen. We're going to talk about House Bill 2279 today, and we have a really nice comparison chart here between the House version and the Senate version, so I thought we'd just start down through the first items. The one side of the page that I have talks about the timing of the GMD annual budget report. The House version had not later than January 31 of each year, and the Senate version was not later than January 25th of each year. Anyone want to discuss that?
Was there an easier administrative thing with the 25th? That was the sense that I got when we were talking about it.
I was gonna.
We're simpler or something.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't entirely sure why the change was made to the 25th. Personally, and I don't want to speak for the other House members, I don't think we have a problem with either.
Yeah. That's not an issue.
I believe that they're just giving us a little more time to work with it. Because the audit was already.
You want to discuss the other provisions there, Lindsay?
Sure. Sure, Mr. Chair. And this is my first conference, so if I make a misstep, feel free to guide me in the right direction. The second part were the annual reports. The Senate combined all the annual reports into a single report, so the financial report and then the report for the action plans. And then they also added the upcoming year's budget to that report as well. We liked the position to put all those reports in one to make it more efficient. However, we did hope to combine some of the included items in the report, so to combine the House and the Senate position on that item. And I had an amendment drafted for that, if this would be the appropriate time to share that with everyone. So what this amendment would do is keep the Senate changes, but add back in the House changes. We thought it was important to be very specific in terms of how, in identifying the money that was being received. So this would ensure that they list all of their income sources and how much income was received, including grants and interest income earned. So that just helps us get a better idea. In GMD3, for example, they actually receive a lot of federal grants, and that's not knowledge or information that we necessarily have in the budgets that we received. So we thought that would be helpful information, as well as an itemized list of expenditures and accounting of all assets, which was also included in the Senate version. And then it keeps the additions the Senate made of adding the budget to that fiscal year, the detailed description of activities, and then what the House had and what is amended subsection 6 and 7. And I would be happy to answer questions about that.
Any questions, Katie? Senator Reitman.
This is the first time I've seen this, but looking at it, it looks good to me. Easy to read. What we was trying to do is to try to make it simpler and easier for people to report. The list we had for different conferees of the time frame and what they had and whatever. And so this is itemizing the income and the sources, where they received it, and also I like the part with any grants or interest, so we do know then the source of their income, itemizing the expenditures, and accounts of all the assets, so then obviously we know how much money and where they're spending it. I see no problem. I don't know if anybody else does.
Any other comments?
Turn that back on. If I'm looking at this chart that we're all looking at, if we took the Senate version and did the first item and we did the last item, I think it is a good idea that the Groundwater Management District publishes on their district website for transparency. I think that's a great idea. And then maybe we insert Lindsay's amendment in between those two, and we could all agree that we've kind of covered what we anticipate for the GMD annual budget report. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To confirm, this amendment would include the Senate's position on only doing the most recently approved audited report. So this amendment does include that change, and then it does include the change to publish it on the district's website. So those changes would be included in this amendment.
All right, so we accept those.
There you go.
That's good.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can talk about the priority areas of concern as well. I do have two amendments in this section. And so for the first area, or for the first bullet point, it talks about the date by which the priority areas of concern have to be identified. And then in the House version, there was language about the request for an extension. And the Senate took that extension language out and just made it a hard deadline. I think in the House, we were fine removing that extension language, but then would like to conference on the date. So I would propose that we move that date back to July 1. I'm open to other ideas, but I think that July 1 date would give the districts a year still to identify those areas. Much of that data exists, and that would give them the ability to include that information and any follow-up actions in their budgets as they prepare those at the end of the year, since their fiscal year is on a calendar year. So that would give them 6 months to include that information in their budget process as well. So my suggestion would be to keep the Senate's position on removing the stricken language, but then changing the date back to an earlier time. And I've proposed July 1.
No, she's going 6 months.
Sorry.
When we had a lot of people speaking on this bill, I don't know how many, and we were given the chief engineer the opportunity to extend. And some were concerned as they're starting off if there's going to have enough time. And so our thinking behind that, and we also checked some with you in the House at that time to change it, make a firm date on the 31st. That way there'd be no excuses for them to have that. And that we thought with that, we still would have enough time for people to act on that. So I'm fine with the 31st just to give them more time. That was our thinking when we went with it.
I guess I'll comment that as we were looking at things, this bill in combination with 2302. 2302, we'd like to get off and running July 1 of '23. So the December 31st of 2024 would give the GMDs a year and a half into a 5-year program that has a sunset. We were hoping to see some quicker action than that. And we thought that the Geological Service has a lot of the information that's readily available. We've heard the presentations too, and don't think it would be that difficult to put their priority areas together within a year rather than a year and a half into a 5-year program. That's why we kind of picked that earlier date. July 1 of '24.
Removing the extension, and sorry, I did have an amendment drafted for this, but it does just those things. If hard date, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the last thing that I had on my radar to talk about today was the criteria listed under the priority areas of concern. The Senate position was to change the first criteria to add the explanatory statement after the 50 years. So the House position was to just say the estimated usable lifetime of groundwater is 50 years or less. And then the Senate added a statement to change that to the estimated usable lifetime of groundwater is 50 years or less, or similar aquifer conditions exist as evidenced by water level decline and water use data provided by the Kansas Geological Survey. And I would have a slight tweak, a suggestion for that, and I had an amendment drafted for that as well. And just to provide some background on that, when we reached out and got stakeholder feedback, there was some desire to be able to use the water level and water use data in addition to the usable lifetime estimates. Thank you. And stakeholders just wanted to make sure that it was clear both of those things could be used, but that it maintained the intent of the provision. So originally the term aquifer conditions was selected, but we felt that it was more accurate to say future water availability, and that would reflect the 50 years or less. So the intent is the same as the Senate amendment, and just the hope was just to provide a little bit more specific language to increase the clarity.
Acceptable?
And we removed by the Kansas Geological Survey, since that's mentioned in the proceedings section that, defines it.
That might speak.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I was kind of, when you were passing out, you were reading it. So on page 2, we're talking about on the red there, a similar measure of future water availability can be determined based on local water use and water level data. And taken out with. To me, this is clearer than what we had and what we're getting to, and it's less messy.
That's the hope. I think we felt it was a little clunky coming, and that was, as we were trying to provide input, that was partially our fault too. So we worked with the stakeholders to try and come up with something that was a little bit more clear for everybody involved. So that was the hope.
I like that it expands it beyond just the one metric.
I like that it expands it beyond just the one metric of the 50 years. That just makes sense, because that's may not apply every time, so.
add Lindsay's amendment to it for the second part? Okay. So we'll go to the next page about,
The Senate was fine with this.
Yeah, yeah.
thank you. All right, thank you. Let's see, we've got a lot of agreement here on the action plans until we get down to the review. And I really like the idea that the review should be done similar to the time frame when the Limas were going to be reevaluated. I think that's an excellent timing. That was a great idea.
Help us follow where you are.
Okay, on the first two bullet points were exactly the same, and on the third one, about reviewed every 5 years, and the sentence says at least every 5 years, and I think that's very reasonable. And there was also a comment made during your committee that it should be somewhat near the same time as the Lima's process within each community is reevaluated. I think those are great. I guess it's the, fifth bullet point here? Added IGUCAs. And I think that's a good idea. I don't have any problem with the Senate version on this. We would agree with your version on the action plan area.
We got to do the last bullet point at the beginning.
Mr. Chair, if I may. I believe the last bullet point was where they consolidated the reporting. And so they put the action plan reporting into the financial annual report. And I was comfortable with that, if you guys were comfortable with that.
So you're talking about the last bullet point on the Senate side.
Yep.
And you're fine with beginning January instead of January 15th?
Sure.
Okay, all right.
So we can accept that in the entire Senate section? And then,
Well, let's repeat what you did to make sure they get it right, what we just did.
okay. On the action plan issue, on the second page here, we're going to not utilize the House version. We would go with the Senate version in its entirety. We're all in agreement on that, I believe. Okay?
We accept that you accept our version.
That's debatable, but thank you. Okay, then the next segment we have is on GMD land ownership. And I think that was a very good amendment that came forward on your side. You guys all agree?
Yes.
We would accept the Senate's version there also.
Okay, and we will accept that.
Okay. And we actually came up with the same effective ending date, or effective date to begin, July 1 of 2023, so. Does anybody have any other issues? I believe we agree on all those. Okay, Chris, you want to summarize?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to summarize the agreement on House Bill 2279, assuming that that is finished. The House Bill 2279 would be the Senate version of the bill with 3 changes. First change being what's included in the annual report. That was the first amendment passed out to include some of the House language for an itemized list of income itemize list of all expenditures and accounting of all assets held by the board. And the second change on the bill would be on page 2 in line 23, changing the date for identifying priority areas of concern from December 31 to July 1 of 2024. And then the third and final change would also be on page 2, lines 34 through 35, striking the Senate language and adding in a similar measure, future water availability can be determined based on local water use and water level data as criteria for identifying a priority of concern. With that, yeah.
Can we all agree?
All right. We agree. Senate position, I mean, what Chris said, we're fine with it.
So we can go back to our individual floors and vote to concur on 2279, the changes we've come up with here in the report today. Okay?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I will have to write a report at that point. It's a House bill, so once I get all the signatures from the conference committee, the Senate will run the conference committee report first, and then the House will run the conference committee report after that.
But we're in agreement with 2279. Thank you very much, folks.